Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Transforming Clinical Trial Start Up with Digital Data Flow, a Solution Framework and Hackathon. My name is Stacy Teagan. I am a Senior Program Manager working with TransCelerate, and on behalf of the organization, I want to welcome you today. We have been having a few technical glitches with our webinar system. If the worst thing happens and it ends, please just reconnect and dial in. We'll keep our fingers crossed that that won't happen. I do want to mention that the webinar today is being recorded. The recording will be posted on the TransCelerate website on the events page within a few days. We will also send a follow-up email to all attendees and registrants to provide that link to you once it's posted. We'll start with our TransCelerate mission. I'm going to go to the next slide. For those of you who may not be familiar with TransCelerate, we are a not-for-profit entity created to foster collaboration. We have a shared vision. We've come together to improve the health of people around the world by accelerating and simplifying the research and development of innovative new therapies. Next slide. Who is TransCelerate? TransCelerate is open to biopharmaceutical research and development organizations that engage in innovative discovery, development, and manufacturing of new medicines. We have 20 member companies, many of which I'm sure you are familiar with. And an important distinction in TransCelerate, our project teams, those who create our solutions, are experts from our membership. And on any given day, there are over 1,000 people working on TransCelerate solutions from across this membership. Slide. Our agenda for our webinar today will have a word of welcome from TransCelerate leadership. Then we'll introduce you to our Digital Data Flow initiative. We'll go into some details on the vision for the process. We'll go through our conceptual system architecture, the common data model, which will be needed in order to operate in that architecture. Then we will talk about an exciting event taking place early next year in which we'll invite you to participate in a hackathon around our solution. We'll have some closing remarks from the team, but then we'll turn it over to you to engage with us in questions and discussion. Next slide. A little bit about who you will hear from today. I introduced myself at the top of the call. I am Stacy Teagan. We'll also hear from Janice Chang, our Executive Vice President here at TransCelerate. Supporting the call today will be project managers. We have Garrett Comrie and Shannon Keenan. We also have an email here. If you do have some technical glitches during and rejoining doesn't work, you can email events@TransCelerateBiopharmaInc.com. Next slide. Our subject matter experts for today that you will hear from, we have Bill Illis, who works with Novartis and is our Digital Data Flow Workstream Lead. Bob Hayden from Amgen serves as our Technical Subteam Co-Lead, along with Stacey Murray from UCB. We have Mike Morozevich from Amgen also, who is leading our Common Data Model Subteam. And finally, Reb Buckley from Pfizer, who is the lead on our Process Methodology Subteam. Next slide. Just some logistical items for today. I hope you get the most out of this experience. If you've not used GoToWebinar technology before, we will have our attendees on mute to hopefully have some good quality audio. You can listen in here. You can also change how your screen looks. You can move your control panel around at the top. There is an arrow that will help you do that. We do want to be engaging. So at any point during the webinar, if you have a question, you can enter it directly into the questions pane. Here we will field questions mostly at the end of the presentation, but we will keep an eye on questions if there is, for example, something around audio or technical. So please do feel free to enter questions within that pane during the webinar. Next slide.
As Stacy said, we want to make this session interactive. And in order to facilitate that, we have several live polls throughout today's session. So right now, let's take a try and test out the polling option. So I'm going to launch in a few minutes a polling. This is just an easy one on what is your favorite color. Okay, so I'm going to launch this poll. You will see it come up on your screen. What is your favorite color? So you can select blue, red, orange, or pink. So I ask all participants to please vote. Please know that all polls are completely voluntary. All answers are anonymized and we'll just see the percentages. Okay, we'll give it a couple seconds for people to vote that would like to. Okay, we have some good feedback, around 88%. I'm going to close the poll. And now I'm going to share the results so everyone will be able to see the anonymized results from the poll. As we see, we have a large participation of people that love the color blue.
Thank you, Shannon. As we go back to the slides, we actually do have a slide up on the screen. I want to do a quick check-in. You can comment through the chat window or through the question pane to ensure that our attendees can, in fact, see the slides. What should be on screen is ground rules for today's call.
Yes, Stacy, we can see the slides.
Excellent, thank you. If you are having difficulty seeing, you can reconnect. And as I mentioned, we will be posting the recording of the call after the webinar. Okay. I know we are anxious to get into the content. I want to just cover a few ground rules for us today. A little bit about TransCelerate, and this is how we operate as our entity here. Everything in TransCelerate is voluntary. Participation on the work streams as well as adoption is all voluntary for our member companies. We do aim to make our solutions publicly available and of course are available for public voluntary adoption as well. There are some topics which we cannot discuss today, so we ask you to honor that and respect that. We will avoid information or opinions about vendors, sites, CROs, who's using what, that sort of thing. We'll refrain from discussion around future-looking business development plans of our membership or of your specific organizations, anything related to price, cost, etc. When we get to the Q&A, we'll stay away from those topics as well as questions about specific vendors, costs, or which member companies are using which of the TransCelerate solutions. Enough with the ground rules. Now we'll move on, and I'll hand it over to our Executive Vice President, Janice Chang, to give us a welcome.
Great. Thank you, Stacy. Good morning, good afternoon, and perhaps even good evening to everyone who's a part of the webinar. It's a great pleasure to be part of this session today. Firstly, a big welcome and thank you to everyone who joined. I understand from the team, I believe we have about 250 people registered for just today's session from about nearly 100 different organizations. So it's quite a turnout for this session, and I know I can feel the energy perhaps flowing virtually throughout from all the participants. And this is a really important topic for all of us, I think, in our ecosystem. Many of you, as I look at the attendees list, have also been strong supporters of TransCelerate. So I thank you in advance for your continued support in our mission. Now, I do recognize some of you on the call may not be as familiar about what TransCelerate is all about, and that's okay. That's okay. Maybe starting today, we invite you to be on this journey with us. As you can see on the slide that's being projected, we've grown quite a bit at TransCelerate since our inception in late 2012. And for those of you who are wondering what TransCelerate is all about, here at TransCelerate, we're all about collaboration. collaboration not only across the member companies, but also collaboration with different stakeholder groups. And very often, perhaps more importantly, it's having the courage to collaborate and tackle things that or areas that haven't been tackled before. So now, I will say, reflecting back to the very beginning when we were first launched, the idea of bringing leaders from various pharmaceutical companies together to collaborate in a pre-competitive manner, I think we had quite a few healthy skeptics back in the days. And that was a question for many people on, can they really find a way to come together to collaborate and drive efficiencies? I think for those of you who have been tracking our progress, what we have been able to demonstrate year after year over the past 7 years, as we continue to deliver pragmatic and tangible solutions and launch new collaborative opportunities. The answer to that question is yes. I think that over the past 7 years, not only have we demonstrated that if you find the right opportunities, the right pinpoints, it's almost human nature that we want to come as a group to try and solve those pain points together. And I think for me, having observed the work that we have delivered across the ecosystem, not only have we proven that the sponsor companies can come together to collaborate effectively, but more importantly, we found ways to engage with various stakeholder groups across the ecosystem in our work, because we know that if we really, really want to move the needle and evolve the ecosystem in the right direction, we have to bring the different stakeholder groups on the journey. So, for example, we engage with site organizations in some of the work that we're doing in aim to reduce site burdens. We have worked with patient advocacy groups to gather their insights in some of the work that we've done in aiming to improve patient experiences. And I think it's also, for me personally, is one area that has kind of really been incredibly encouraging is the support and interest we're seeing from various health authorities over the past 4 or 5 years. Because what's really becoming evident is that the health authorities, FDA, EMA, PMDA, they are all experiencing very often the same pain points that we are experiencing. And they are very keen to interact with entities such like TransCelerate because we represent a united voice across 20 companies. So we're now seeing health authorities proactively engaging with TransCelerate, not only to hear about the progress of the different types of work we're trying to progress in, but also very often there's interest to actually jointly ideate with TransCelerate to think about areas of pain points that we can potentially collaborate with regulators together to move forward. So we started with just 10 companies and with 5 projects, and as you can see, 7 years later, we have 20 companies in our membership, and every day we are collaborating across the globe with global participants across 25 plus projects. And some of the earlier work that we have done really laid the foundation to allow us now, from a portfolio perspective, to take on some of the more transformative ideas, including the Digital Data Flow Initiative, which you'll hear more about. The work that we've done 4 or 5 years ago around Common Protocol Template, for example, was necessary and laid the foundation for us to now evolve into the Digital Data Flow Initiative. We talked about evolving and moving the needle quite a bit if we really want to do that in the DDF space, digital data flow space, we know that we have to take collaboration to a different level. And we need input from all of you on the call in different stakeholder groups, including the technology community. We want to invite the stakeholder groups to be on this journey with us. We think that's really critical. And I think that it's really important for all of us, myself included, to ensure that it's really about changing our mindset together on this journey as we move forward. Today, you'll hear about the work our digital data flow team has done to date. And I will say the vision for this project is transformative. It's innovative. And frankly, it's something that hasn't been done before. And you'll also hear from the team about opportunities on how we see the technology community can engage directly with us to help evolve this space together. And again, we want the input from all of you who are on the call, and not just during today's webinar. We want you to be a part of this dialogue in the months to come as we continue to progress in this space. I will leave with, as we often say within TransCelerate across our teams, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, let's go together. And I think that is a very, very important mindset to keep in mind as we try and move the needle in this space. And again, trying to venture into perhaps an area where we haven't really tackled together before as an ecosystem. So thank you in advance, all of you, for being part of this webinar and being part of this change journey. And hopefully you will become champions of this change journey going forward. And I will say I encourage all of us to take off our company hat as we progress on this journey together, and think out of our daily norms, think out of how we've always done things together. Because I think at the end of the day, we have to come together to find ways to advance the technologies, but also optimize the ways of working across the different stakeholder groups in this space to help benefit and patients who are eagerly waiting for the medicines. So, and I do believe that we believe here at TransCelerate that initiatives such as DDF has the potential to ultimately change that growth chart for medicine in the long run. So a big welcome to all of you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the webinar. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to Bill.
Thank you, Janice. Thanks for that introduction to TransCelerate and the great work being done within the consortium. And thank you to everyone who's able to join us today. I'm really pleased to see the interest so far in our webinar and in our project. And we hope this is the first of many interactions and many conversations that we're able to have with you all. I want to kick off today with a bit of context setting before we get into some of the details about the work of the digital data flow team. And later we'll bring on our sub-team leads who will be talking to you about specific processes, technology, and data elements in our proposed design before closing the session today with information about our virtual hackathon event, which we're planning for the first quarter of 2020. So I think it's no surprise to everyone. Clearly, we have been and are still in a period of high innovation, change, and disruption. In the life sciences, there's been rapid advancements, including the first sequencing of the whole human genome about 20 years ago, followed by the rise of CRISPR gene editing technology in the last 10 years, the approval of, more recently, of innovative and life-saving cell and gene therapy products based on personalized genetic reprogramming and transfusion. In parallel, the Internet of Things is enabling new dimensions in interconnectivity and streams of data from all manner of specialized data collection devices, tracking devices, smart appliances, and so on, with many applications to healthcare in general and pharmaceutical development and clinical research. Also in parallel, we're in the age of big data, with aspects of data, its collection, usage, security, and privacy in the news every day. In the pharma world, this is reflected in the rise of the use of real-world data to inform the design of clinical trials and as natural disease history control groups. Another example is the reuse of data from prior clinical studies, such as incorporating historical control groups into study designs. The overall trend is towards increasingly rich and better curated data sources, plus more and more sophisticated analytics tools and methods to mine this data for insights. There have been a number of pharma ventures, deals, acquisitions in this space, with companies like 23andMe focused on genomics data, Flatiron Health focused on curated electronic health data. The EHR vendor Epic Systems is reportedly building a repository of EHR records covering 230 million patients. All of these developments hold the promise to accelerate the research and development of innovative new medicines and potential cures. You can look at the strategic plans of any of the TransCelerate member companies and find an increasingly high focus on digital and data, and without exception, all TransCelerate initiatives focus on aspects of these topics, in some cases actual solutions, but also best practices, guidelines, regulatory and policy impacts, and the like. Next slide, please. Still, despite all the rapid advancement in scientific knowledge and all the data and digital innovation and disruption, the current state of affairs is that we have high and increasing costs, lower and decreasing returns, low access to care, unserved populations in need, and relatively high drug prices. On the two charts on this slide, you see the total health spending is increasing at a similar rate to which return on investment in pharma research and development is decreasing. The average cost of developing a medicine in 2003 was estimated at $802 million US dollars. In 2018, the estimate is $2.6 billion. During the same period, the US dollar experienced an average inflation rate of 2.1% per year. In other words, $100 in 2003 is equivalent to the purchasing power of $136 in 2018, an inflation rate of 36% over 15 years. In this same time period, the cost of developing a medicine rose from $802 million to $2.6 billion. In other words, $100 of drug development spending in 2003 is equivalent to $313 in 2018, an increase of over 200%. Stated another way, if the cost of developing a medicine had increased with inflation during that same time period, it would now be $1.1 billion. Instead, current estimates are $2.6 billion, an increase 5 times faster than the baseline rate of inflation. And while these costs went up, we had higher prices, still low access to care, unserved populations on every continent. So recently, a seemingly lot of activity in data and digital, but as of yet, not much to show for it. Moving on, the heat map on the left side of this slide shows both the pharmaceutical industry and healthcare overall lagging behind in investments in digitization compared to many industries. Some of the identified barriers include resistance to change and a relatively risk-averse culture, high investment risk and unclear return on investment on some of these digitization initiatives, poor user experience. We've often implemented fragmented and disconnected components of systems, have a highly complex landscape, and have faced a number of challenges, especially in deploying consistently and sustainably technology with sites and patients. There's also regulatory uncertainty, global variations in regulations, varying interpretations, and for example, lack of specific guidance on the use of patient technology in clinical trials. On the right-hand side of this slide is an example that one of our team members developed reflecting on the stalled digitization in pharma development. It's an analogy to the rise of mapping and navigation solutions over the past 20 years. In around 1996, MapQuest was released as one of the first web-based mapping websites. I'm sure some of you can remember using this tool. The common pattern of usage at the time was to enter to and from locations, select a route, and finally print out a set of customized directions and take them with you. There were no location services, no dynamic updates of directions and traffic, etc. Over time, features were added and the accuracy of the maps and directions produced improved. From around 1998 to 2006, we saw the rise in popularity of dedicated GPS devices for navigation. These brought a new set of improvements and features, including location mapping, live turn-by-turn directions, dynamic recalculation of new routes, and they started to include historical data on traffic patterns. And then in 2007, you saw GPS-enabled smartphones come onto the market. These displaced dedicated devices and started a period of adding rich features and continuous improvement and innovation to this platform. Automated map updates, more sophisticated routing options, differentiation of roadways, parkways, freeways, toll roads, local roads, etc. Updates on road closures for construction, incorporating speed limit information, real-time traffic data, accidents, speed traps, etc. Dynamic indicators of locations and stores, restaurants, gas stations, and the like. The question is, of course, have we progressed in pharma? In many ways, it seems like we are still using MapQuest in pharma. Many systems and digital technologies have been deployed, to plan, design, manage, and report out on clinical trials, but we often still print out our protocols and take them with us to the next step in the process. Getting insights on a proposed study design often involves manually moving data to another system or accessing separate, disconnected systems and databases. Moving ahead to the opportunities we see to make progress through TransCelerate, our proposition is that we need to focus on creating industry platforms more than individual solutions. This is where the potential value of the TransCelerate Pharma Consortium really jumps out, with the potential to take costs out of the overall clinical research landscape while improving quality and speed. Joining together to focus on common pre-competitive ways of working, and in working together, start to reduce the investment risk, start to tackle regulatory uncertainty, start to overcome the resistance to change, while partnering more continuously to deliver a better user experience to sponsors, sites, regulators, and patients. In the digital data flow workstream, we're focused on one small slice of this overall digitization potential, namely developing the study protocol as a digital data platform, and in doing so, enabling the digital integration of study design services and the configuration of downstream study execution systems. As Janice mentioned, some of the initial work is focused on the clinical study protocol, which is the defining document for regulated clinical research. For any of you who have not worked with clinical study protocols, these are documents that describe how a specific clinical trial will be conducted: objectives, endpoints, design, methodology, statistical considerations, and the overall organization of a clinical trial. It describes how the safety of study participants will be ensured and how the integrity of the data collected will be maintained. The foundation and the starting point of the digital data flow workstream is the work done by another TransCelerate initiative, namely the Common Protocol Template workstream. This workstream developed a common study protocol template and companion technology-enabled version, which is currently in use by member companies and other sponsors, and is available today and can be downloaded from the TransCelerate website. This initiative took the first steps from a TransCelerate member company perspective toward the implementation of a common structured protocol with the ability to capture and export machine-readable content. This initiative is now moving to enable protocol content to be exported and imported, used in other downstream documents which are required to analyze and report on clinical study results, namely the statistical analysis plan and clinical study report. In the Digital Data Flow initiative aims to take this approach to the next level with a fully digitized protocol and managed data flows, not only as structured components between documents, but to and from many systems used to improve study designs and to execute studies in the overall clinical research process. Next slide, please. In the digital data flow high-level design, which you will hear more about during this webinar, we focused on describing a protocol platform solution encompassed by the components in the center of this view, namely the study builder and design repository. We've broken down the use cases into two major categories. On the left-hand side, we envision connections to tools, data, and services which are providing relevant insights, recommendations, and assistance to clinical trial teams, study designers, and protocol authors during the process of designing a study and producing a study protocol. On the right-hand side are documents and systems that are required for the execution of the study. In this model, these downstream documents and systems would receive digital study design data from the protocol platform. The use case is marked by a star or in scope of other TransCelerate initiatives. In this context, the Digital Data Flow initiative can amplify the value of deliverables from these initiatives through the implementation of structured data flows and digital interconnections, which makes the right study design information available in the right places at the right time. Each of these use cases and many others represent an opportunity to improve both the study design process and the study startup process through digital data connections, replacing mostly manual interfaces in some cases, and in other cases adding completely new capabilities that are not available today. To summarize and coming back to the big picture, why is this important? We operate with many systems in scope of study design and startup that are dependent on manual entry and re-entry repeatedly of the same information from the defining study protocol. These include the reuse of the same content in the statistical analysis plans and clinical study reports, as well as study configuration information needed, for example, by electronic data capture systems, clinical trial management systems, interactive response systems, and many others. To address this, we are working to design an extensible and open digital protocol data platform to enable data interoperability between connecting systems and services, supporting study design, protocol authoring, and startup readiness. Finally, we expect this to lead to a comprehensive environment supporting the creation of digital protocols across the industry, and over time leveraging more and more digital data connections to improve study designs and quality, better handle changes such as protocol amendments, reduce manual efforts and cycle times by managing and reusing digitized study design data across this landscape. Through TransCelerate, we're taking the lead and doing our part to enable the development of a sustainable and impactful solution and platforms, which will create the foundation for continuous improvements towards digitizing clinical research processes. In the next 3 modules in this webinar, you'll hear more about the next level of detail on processes, technology, and data from the respective digital data flow workstream subteam leads, concluding with a 4th module providing information on the next steps and our plan to hold a virtual hackathon event in the first quarter of 2020, which we invite you to participate in. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Reb Buckley, Digital Data Flow Process and Methodology Subteam Co-Lead.
Thanks a lot, Bill. Next slide, please. So as many of you on the phone may not really have extensive experience in the clinical trial setting, my goal here was kind of just to provide just a little bit of background on a couple terms you're going to be hearing a lot of, the clinical trial and the protocol. In a clinical trial, it's essentially, this is the work being done by drug companies through the help of investigators and volunteer patients to assess the safety and efficacy of a new drug or a new treatment. The clinical trial itself is a very structured and scientific experiment. It's designed to, in an unbiased manner, prove or disprove a hypothesis about the new treatment. Every drug or treatment on the marketplace has to go through multiple clinical trials before this can be prescribed. The protocol can be thought of as the rule book for the clinical trial, and there's a lot of details. It describes in detail in it how the trial is to be run, what the hypothesis is, patients that are supposed to be on the trial, procedures that need to happen, and how the data will eventually be reviewed to either prove or disprove that hypothesis. Next slide. The anatomy of a protocol, which is shown through the clinical trial, or the common protocol template that was shown before. Protocol is pieces, background of a rationale, which shows why we're doing the study, trial objectives, which is what we hope to prove, patient selection, which can inform and define the subset of patients will look like, plans and procedures, which will define the schedule of the study and what's specifically required within each study, as well as the defined endpoints. And this can also change based on populations or geographic settings. And finally, the analysis part of it to show how we either completed or didn't complete the answering of the hypothesis. Next slide. What the digital data flow looks to do is looking at both our current state and our future state. In the current state, as Bill had mentioned, a lot of manual processes happen. Today, we work in a very linear process. Each step has had automations added to make them more efficient. However, there's not much that has gone between these steps to be able to help the efficiency all the way through the process. In digital data flow, by looking at the way these processes actually depend upon each other and depend upon similar data sets, much more of this work can be completed in parallel and can remove many of the bottlenecks that we've had plaguing our current process. Next slide. This table of contents that is shown here is part of a document that we've prepared that will come out for the future hackathons. And this it's an overall guidance document that the teams have put together for the digital data flow, outlining the thoughts on the process, how it can be pulled together, and the various sections that we'll hear about today from the other sub-team leads. And this slide's actually a building slide, so if you just click one more time. The user interface is a part that we're looking at to build into this. And I think the thoughts here are really what we visualize as an interface. It can be likened to something like tax preparation software, where you have a system where relational data is either imported or it's entered by a user only one time. And then that data can be pushed downstream and surfaced in multiple places for either systems or forms. Next. The user narrative section that we prepared, the process team has put together user narratives to demonstrate what requirements or decisions are made at the various steps, how we understand how those decisions may change or affect future selections or options that are available to the system as it goes forward. Next. The system architecture, our technology sub-team has envisioned the flow of the processing of the data, and this will be discussed later in the sub-team today. And finally, the common data module. The common data module team has also put together relationship information. They've begun to explore where there may be industry standards or various standard sets that we can use. And this will also be discussed later on today. Next slide. So the data flow schematics here for a study, and this is part of what the process team was using to envision how the main data points can help to drive people's decisions as we build a study. If you look at the third column on this page, there are buckets that we've put together: fixed trial concepts, therapeutic area concepts, assessments and measures, operational, and orphan assessments. And these main buckets I'm going to describe a little bit in further slides. Next. The fixed trial concepts, things that can drive the fixed trial concepts, these are ideas that are existing in every single study. They could basically be maintained on the shelf in a virtual shelf called a study skeleton or something like that. And it's simply the idea that when you begin a study, you will always require certain items or certain data points to be made available. Next slide. And then there comes the trial concepts. And trial concepts are typically driven more by a therapeutic area. They're pushed into implementation due to either particular diseases under study, and they may range from data collection needs, patient recruitment processes, or other analyses that may occur. The general flow here is actually a piece where we start looking at the questions that are being asked by the protocol themselves. And these questions are usually referred to as objectives and endpoints. And the objectives and endpoints can drive things such as the assessments in a study. And assessments are tests or data that are collected on the patients. It's a key driving force here, is used to help prove or disprove the hypothesis. And many of the standard objectives and endpoints provide not only descriptions of what needs to be collected, but they can also provide the timing, which you can see in the final column where it shows the time points that are collected for those labs. Next slide. In the user narrative section of the document, most of the slides I've shown before are actually broken out into these kind of formats and this kind of visualization, along with the description of how the user takes this information to go to the next step. As you go through the process, what is seen inside of the user narratives are that the same data points are used by various users for similar but not the exact same process being done in the clinical trial build. And this is where we see the benefit of the digital data flow, being able to harmonize that data collection, keep it in one spot, and hand it off to the various users at the points that they need. Next slide. Next slide, if you guys are all set.
So we've just heard a little bit about digital data flow. We've heard around the concepts of clinical protocol, and I just wanted to take a little pause now, and do an audience poll to see, do you have experience at capturing metadata, structuring content, then populating artifacts or automating system configuration? So we're just going to take a couple minutes. I'm going to launch the poll. Okay, launching the poll now. So take a few seconds. We have yes, no, or no, but we know companies with these capabilities. Again, just a reminder that all answers are anonymized and the poll is strictly voluntary. We'll give it a couple seconds to allow participants to cast their final vote. Okay, as we can see, we have a really good return. We have 65% of the attendees on the line have said yes, that they do have experience in this area. We have 25% that said had no, and 10% that although they may not know, but they do know companies with these capabilities. Okay. And moving on, we will continue with Bob Hayden. He is a principal architect, tech co-lead. He's going to give an overview of the conceptual system architecture.
Great, thank you, Shannon. Hi, everyone. I'd like to start with an overview of the conceptual system architecture. On this diagram, what I'd like to do first is just give some context around the legend and the different pieces. And then on the following slides, I'll go into some more detail about the various components. The main points to note on here in the blue boxes, that's in the center of the diagram, these are the pieces that we see that are missing within the ecosystem today and are the pieces that we feel are going to be necessary to achieve the vision of digital data flow. The arrows on the diagram are illustrating data flow, roughly, and the flow of information is mostly from the left to the right. And so what I'll do now is go through the diagram and note some modules or components in more detail. Next slide. A major component of the conceptual architecture is the study builder. So the study builder is an application that will provide a guided process to study designers in order to develop a study design. The pieces in here are modular. So we want this to be an open type of application where modules could be added from different providers that are supporting and providing specific functionality. So for example, with the authoring of a study, as you saw earlier, there's different components such as objectives, endpoints, schedule of activities, and these would be modules that are part of the study builder build functionality. There'll also be components that we believe are necessary to support that authoring process. We want to be able to provide access to other studies, to external data sets, and then be able to leverage things like simulations, machine learning algorithms, et cetera, to help provide guidance to the study authors when they're designing a study. So they'll be able to see trends, be able to see how information's been collected in the past, and then really be able to accelerate the study design process by tapping into these other data sources. And then in addition to that, there'll be core functionality that you see typically with any enterprise application, such as versioning, workflow, security, import, export capabilities. These will also be present in the study builder to make it an enterprise class application. Next slide. A critical component of the study builder is also the study design repository. So what this will be is a place to store all the study designs that are authored in the study builder. This will give future study authors the ability to leverage components of studies that were previously used to improve efficiencies and be able to provide, again, guidance on what tests, measures, and things are needed in a clinical study. This should be based on the digital data flow common data model. So the storage of those protocols or those study designs will be stored in that format and then made available to other systems in that format. So that's a critical part of this, is to have a standard for how these protocols are represented. Additional metadata will be kept in here too to keep track of an audit trail and version history to be able to support amendments and changes to the study design. This will be versioned and kept track of in the study repository as well. And then of course, it'll be a secure repository. So there'll be security built in to be able to support privacy and sharing requirements. Some studies will be shared across the pharmaceutical company. Some may be shared outside of the company. Anyway, there'll be different requirements for how the study designs need to be maintained in a secure way. Next slide, please. A key part of the study design process is being able to take advantage of standards. So CDISC is an industry consortium that provides clinical data standards. These standards are used by pharmaceutical companies, CROs and others to develop clinical studies and collect clinical data in a consistent way. So these standards contain controlled terminology packages, and they help to automate standards-based processes and applications. And CDISC also provides access to new relationships between standards that are being developed. Next slide. In addition to CDISC, for those external standards, pharmaceutical companies also have their own internal sponsor global libraries. So these are internal standards that also are important when developing a clinical trial design. These contain global standards, disease-specific clinical standards, and these standard descriptors will complement the protocol definition. So the objective here is to maintain consistency across the sponsor study designs. So the global libraries within the sponsor, along with the CDISC libraries, will be critical input into the study builder to make sure that these study designs are aligning with standards, best practices. Next slide. The data sources on the left will provide data to support the clinical study design process. So these will be any external sources that are valuable when looking at ways to design a clinical study. Some examples of these would be internal historical studies for a particular pharma company, external study data that's publicly available, real world data. And these will all be data sets that need to, or that will be valuable to support things like simulation and machine learning to be able to improve the efficiency and the accuracy of clinical studies. Next slide. Now, once the study design is present in the study builder, it needs to be exchanged with downstream systems. As Bill noted earlier, this is an area of opportunity as far as efficiency. Currently today, this data gets entered into a lot of systems manually, and what we are trying to achieve here is an automation of how these study designs can flow to downstream systems. So to do this technically, there's a couple different approaches. One is for the systems that need the study design information to subscribe to APIs that will be made available on the study builder. That's a preferred approach. However, we realize that there's a lot of existing systems in the environment that also need access to the study design, but may not be able to natively consume the common data model and these study designs. In that case, what would be needed is something like a deployment engine or a mapping engine that takes the information from the study design in the study builder and design repository and translates it into the format needed for other systems to consume that. So that's what we've depicted over here on the right, that there'll be a mixture of compatible systems and what we're calling non-compatible, which all need to be supported. We don't want to favor or have a preference for any particular type of system. We want this to be an open environment that all systems can take part in. So that's the reason for having two different ways to consume data from the study builder. Next slide. And then, as I noted, the DDF compatible systems, these will have an ability to directly interface with the study design APIs using the common data model as an exchange format. And then these systems will follow open design principles. They'll also be based on modern API best practices. So we'll use technologies such as REST, JSON, OAuth for authentication, et cetera. This will all be using industry standard technologies. Next slide. And then, as was noted earlier, the common protocol template, or actually any type of kind of traditional document that needs to be produced, we want to provide a templating-based approach to do this. So documents such as a traditional protocol, the CSR, the clinical study report, that is, and the SAP or statistical analysis plan. These would all be examples of documents, kind of traditional documents that would, if needed to be produced, would use this templating-based approach to take data from the machine readable study builder and then convert it and populate the documents when needed. Next slide. Great. So that's a overview of the conceptual architecture. What I also wanted to do is highlight some design principles that we want to make sure are that everyone is aware of. And these principles are general rules that inform the way the platform will be implemented. And that's important because these provide consistency across the architecture and ensure alignment with business and technology objectives. And so I will just highlight a few of these that we feel are especially important. Automation is important to increase efficiencies and be able to support things like workflows. Parallel workflows, which Reb mentioned earlier, are going to be critical to achieve the efficiency that we envision for this future state. The principle around remaining vendor and system agnostic, that is very important as well, because we don't want to favor any particular system that's in place in a pharmaceutical company or any particular systems that are part of this ecosystem. By remaining vendor and system agnostic, this will allow many different technology providers to participate, or actually all technology providers that are interested in participating. And a modular design is also important to achieve that, so that pieces can be plugged into the architecture for certain capabilities. The concept of a built-in interrogative user interface, that's a wizard-style interface that will guide the user and make it easy to author a study design. And then authentication and authorization, we want to be able to use existing systems for that. So if there's an existing identity provider or source of that user information, that would also be something that gets integrated and included in the solution. And for more details on all these principles and the conceptual design, you can refer to the Digital Data Flow Solution Framework and Conceptual Design, which will also be made available on the TransCelerate website. And with that, I would like to now hand over to Mike to talk about the Common Data Model.
Thanks, Bob. So to enable the automation and reuse of data by different systems, the study builder will rely on a core underlying structure that we call the Common Data Model. The Common Data Model is a set of data elements, controlled terminology to be used with those data elements, and relationships used across the data elements, which will enable the automation and reuse of data. Let's dive a bit deeper into the model and get a feel for what the data elements look like and how they relate to one another. We start off in the upper left-hand corner where we define a study that we're working on. You can see there are many ways to represent this study with a protocol ID, title, short title, acronym. This will be related to a therapeutic area and a phase which will be selected by the user in the study builder. The phase information will help filter the objective library and can highlight different areas of focus based on this information. For example, you're more likely to focus heavily on general safety for earlier phases and shift this focus to efficacy parameters in later phases. The therapeutic area would then relate to one or many indications. Each of these should have coded terms so that we can effectively link to additional components. The indication will then relate to one or many objectives from the objective library. The objective library would be made up of CDISC library content as well as pharma company defined standards. Objectives will have relationships to endpoints. In the objective and endpoint, you can see that it's made up of many attributes. We have a block of text, which is how you would expect to see it in the protocol. However, we then have many other attributes, which will be used to help link to additional downstream components. The level will be defined as primary, secondary, tertiary, exploratory, and can be used to help map to clinical trial registries like clinicaltrials.gov. The biomedical concept will help link to the data that's needed and will be described in more detail shortly. The analysis type will standardize what type of analysis is being performed, like change from baseline, and this will help define the time points that are required for that analysis. All these individual attributes associated with the objective or endpoint will help define the digitized schedule of activities. Not all attributes will always be populated. In some instances, you may have a generic objective with detailed endpoints that define the biomedical concepts and time points, while other times the objective may provide these details. The system will need to be flexible to handle any scenario. As I mentioned earlier, these will need to relate to standardized biomedical concepts, which will come from the CDISC library or pharma company defined standards. The biomedical concept is a unique piece of data that may be collected on a similar data collection form as similar data. For example, you may have two lab parameters that are different endpoints that are collected together or sent in from an external source. Or you may have a biomedical concept which represents many questions collected together, like a standardized questionnaire, We'll need to make sure the system's smart enough to know when to combine data and when it's not required. One thing to note, in the current diagram, I mentioned data collection forms since this is the world we currently live in. However, we'd look to future-proof this as well, and we'll be working with other teams like eSource to be able to get this data from sources like HL7 Fire in the future. The CDM was designed by using foundational industry standards such as clinical trial registries and CDISC's data exchange standards like ODM. The overall vision is that we hope this work to develop the CDM can help harmonize these different systems over time, because we're noticing some inconsistencies as to what each of them require at the moment. It will also be critical to utilize a single source for controlled terminology to facilitate the relationships and downstream automation. This is another area of improvement for the industry, since we're noticing many inconsistencies across the foundational standards when it comes to controlled terminology. This next slide shows how we may present the CDM to system users. It would define the different data elements, a definition to help understand what should be included in the data element, the harmonized expected controlled terminology or source for the terminology, where we have SNOMED as an example, and if the data will be required or not in the study builder. We'll also work with tech vendors to further define if these are parent data elements or attributes of a data element. As an example, you can see towards the bottom, we have multiple rows for the objective data elements. However, many of these things will most likely be attributes to a parent data element. Throughout these slides, I've mentioned using CDISC library as a source for many of our components. Therefore, collaboration with CDISC is crucial to make this all work. On the left, we have the CDISC 360 project, where they're developing the concept-based linked data, which will enable the population of our objective and endpoint library, while also identifying the biomedical concepts required for our digitized schedule of activities. On the right, we have our DDF workstream, which will be developing the blueprint for the study builder to utilize CDISC information for study automation. We of course work very closely with CDISC, including regular calls to discuss progress of the two initiatives, highlight accomplishments, and share and discuss any issues. Next, I'm going to turn it over to Stacy Murray, who will discuss the hackathon.
Thank you, Mike, for that summary for the common data model. Now we would like to talk about the hackathon itself, starting with the goals of the hackathon. The first goal is to verify our design. The digital data flow team has developed a conceptual solution and design, and we want to get practical feedback from technology providers. We believe the best way to assess the viability of the design is through some building of code from real-world scenarios through the hackathon. Another goal of the hackathon is market adoption. The hackathon will provide another forum for prospective technology providers to learn about this initiative. There's also industry alignment. We'd like to engage large groups, drive industry alignment on the core principle of interoperability and an open solution framework. We also want to encourage a wide variety of innovative ideas from both large and small providers. We would also like to identify technological vendors of interest for potential future collaboration. That collaboration model is yet to be determined. Next slide, please. Through the hackathon, we are putting together a package. This technology package will provide key material for that minimal viable product that we hope to see developed through the hackathon activities. That package will include an agile method process covering user stories. Those user stories will be also providing supporting mock data and examples where applicable from a protocol. There will also be a process flow that maps out where the user stories fit in the overall process. In addition, the technological package will include the solution framework and conceptual design. Those are also available on TransCelerate's website. There will also be a summary of the common data model. In addition to the technology package, some of the key information for the timing, approach, and what's next for the hackathon, there will be a secondary webinar in February. That webinar will cover more in-depth details of the hackathon, logistics, and how to register. The approach of the hackathon will be a 30-day virtual event. The hackathon will take place in March of 2020. TransCelerate's website, as of now, has that solution framework available for pre-read and content.
Thank you, Stacy, for the information on the hackathon. We have two final polls for the audience. The first, after you heard this morning details about DDF, the conceptual diagram, all about clinical protocol, more information on the hackathon, wanted to take a poll to see if you're interested in learning more and providing input on the development of a protocol platform digital data flow solution. I'm going to launch this poll. And as you can see, you can respond as very interested, somewhat interested, undecided, or not interested. And just reminding everyone that all of the results are anonymized and it is purely voluntary to participate in the poll. We'll give it a few seconds for people to get the opportunity to cast their vote. Okay, as you can see, some really good feedback we have here today. 74% very interested, 17% somewhat, 7% still undecided. And as was discussed during today's webinar, all the materials will be posted on the website, TransCelerate website, along with the solution framework and user stories will be coming. So if you need more information, they will be there. We have another poll. Our last and final poll for today. For tech vendors on the line, how likely are you to participate in the 30-day virtual hackathon? I'm going to launch the poll. You can see your responses: very likely, likely, neutral, unlikely, or very unlikely. I'll keep the poll open for a few more seconds. Okay, I'm going to get ready to close the poll and read out the responses. Okay, as you see, we have, which is really great, we have over 70% in the likely and very likely that would like to participate in the hackathon. So thank you everyone for sharing your results. And now I'm going to pass on to Bill Ellis, who is going to provide some closing remarks.
Thanks. Thanks, Shannon. So to wrap it up, we've published the Digital Data Flow Solution Framework and Conceptual Design. As you've heard, we've given you a taste during the webinar today of what's in that document. It is available to you on the TransCelerate website, so I encourage you to go download that document and have a closer look at it. This document informs the setup of our virtual hackathon event, which, as you heard, will be held in March of next year. And following that, we expect to be updating the design documentation and implementing our execution phase strategy, leading to the active development of digital data flow solutions with collaborators. Finally, there will be a short post-webinar survey sent to you next week, and we request your response to that. Won't take long to complete that. The hackathon registration, as mentioned, opens in January 2020, and we will be conducting a follow-up webinar dedicated to the hackathon logistics and challenge exercise and process, and that will occur in February of 2020.